we've been looking over this now second week at a question: God, are you there? And our hope over these next few weeks, and what we started with last week, was to give you guys evidence, a lot of really good evidence, to not just know that God is there, but that God is near. And what we're hoping for is that you guys will continue to build upon underneath your feet a foundation of comfortability and confidence to know that the God who created the heavens and the earth is not only someone that we need to look up to, but that we need to someone to look at as someone who wants to be a part of our lives and wants for us to connect with him on a real level. And we're going to go back to last week to kind of get ourselves started this week, because last week's talk was so good insofar as it gave us an understanding that there is a someone behind the something that we call existence. And I'm kind of glad that there is. That through the fine-tuning of our universe, there is no need for us to think about some random chance, big old bag full of luck that got us to the present day where we are. That there is someone who is beyond all of the universe, who is incredibly intelligent, who is eternal, who is all-powerful, who is creative, who is caring, and who is personal, who has designed me and you in such a way to know him at a heart level. And King David, through the Psalms, does everything he can to give us this understanding. And honestly, I'm kind of glad that we have a someone behind the something, because I'm not very good at running my own life. I'm terrible at trying to make a decision to do what I need to do next, much less having the clarity and the purpose of where we need to go with our lives as the human race. I mean, when you look at humanity, we need someone to look up to who is more intelligent than us, who is more careful and personal than we can ever imagine, who has all the power and all the creativity to be this creator. We need the one who created the galaxies, like this one right here. Do you guys see that? That is the Whirlpool galaxy. It is 30 million light years away, and it's just hanging out there in the sky. God of the heavens created that galaxy and created me and created you, to know him, so that we can have an understanding that, man, the designer behind that galaxy, which is 30 million light years away, the fact that we have technology that can take a picture of that is bananas. But beyond that, the fact that we can know the God of that picture is something. And there's some things that I think for a lot of us we hold on to and we believe because of this creator that created us. Well, as believers, as followers of Jesus, there are other things too that lead us to believe that not only is God there, but God is near. And one thing in particular is the Bible. What we as Christians call the Word of God, or the words of God, bound together in a collection of documents known as the Bible. There are 66 books within the Bible, and Christians have believed in the internal consistency of its words. We understand there were 40 different authors on 3 different continents over a 1,500-year period of time that told the story of God. The Christians believe that these words are and have been preserved throughout the last 2,000 years, giving us an understanding of how God operates and where he intervened in history and what he is all about, and how we as human beings should live our lives from the beginning of our life to the end of our life and everything in between. There are stories of Jesus in this Bible. There are things about how to do life. I mean, as a matter of fact, the entire Western world, the precepts of how we do everything as society is built upon the words of God. The laws that we have, the wisdom that we apply, the way we treat ourselves, the family structure, all found within the Bible. And for the Christians, we love it. We actually believe it's inerrant, infallible, and an integral part of our life. We believe that these are the words to live by. We believe that because of the Bible, that God not only is there, but he is near. But that's what we believe. But there are people on the planet who do not believe like we believe. They do not have that understanding about the internal consistencies of the Bible. And the fact that there are over 340,000 cross-references between the Old Testament and the New Testament with no contradictions whatsoever, speaking to the validity and the internal consistency of these words. They think that the believers of the Bible just believe the Bible because they're believers of the Bible. But I kind of get what they're trying to say. But what if there was an answer to the question, is the Bible worth believing? What if there was some extra biblical answers or evidence to point to those that do not look at the Bible like we do and say, yeah, there might be some things that you could pick up on, you could explore, you could begin to develop in your mind to help you understand that not only is there's some internal things going on within the Bible that are super cool. There's also some things that when it comes to history, when it comes to what happened in the annals of time, the Bible speaks to those things with an accuracy that is unbelievable, or at the very least, leads you to believe something over nothing. Because for us as followers of Jesus, we're pretty convinced that when it comes to the Bible, that these words are more than just words, that there's something incredible about them. And what I want to do over the next few minutes is provide you 4 pieces of evidence to let you guys know that, yes, there is some things that help us understand the importance of the Bible, that there are some things that are outside of the Bible that point right back to the Bible and let us know that history has been recorded in this book itself. And we're going to look at a thing, too, that is going to help us figure out what this is. You see, last week we looked up into the heavens and we saw the stars and the galaxies and the fine-tuning of our universe. This week we're going to look down into the ground, into the earth, literally. And we're going to see what's been dug up and how for the last 150 years there's this dirty science called archaeology that's going to help us figure out what happened back then and whether or not this good book that we call a good book is a really good book beyond it just being something that we believe in. We're going to look at the records and some research done by the Bible Archaeology Report, a guy named Dr. John Currid, a Mr. Brian Wendell, and then of course there's a professor named Dr. Farrell Jenkins from Florida Bible College who does a lot of stuff in the Middle East, kind of putting together a lot of the archaeological finds of the day. And the reason why we want to do this morning is to give you guys even more of a firm foundation to stand upon as it relates to the God that is there is also the God that is near. So let's travel back to 1868, will you? We're going to go to Jerusalem. We're going to be hanging out with a missionary who has found a stone known as the Moabite Stone, and we have a picture of that right there. And the actual Moabite Stone was broken into a bunch of pieces and parts and sold off because they were able to make more money. But there was a copy of it that was actually preserved and put into the Louvre in Paris, where they have the Mona Lisa, even though I don't think this has been stolen yet. Well, on the Moabite Stone, there is an inscription written in around 800 to 850 BC, okay? So let's go way back in time. And on that inscription, it says, King Mesha, son of Chemosh of the Moabites. And then it provides what's called a victory stone record of a battle or two that was faced between the Moabites and the northern kingdom of the Israelites. And King Ahab, who was the northern kingdom's king, he had passed away and he had passed along his kingdom to his son Jehoram. And Jehoram had lived a certain amount of years and there were some battles going on. And King Mesha of the Moabites had written this out and basically was waving the flag saying, we did a really, really good job that one day at that one time against those people, the Israelites. What's remarkable about that stone is that there's a recording within the scriptures that speaks exactly to that event. In 2 Corinthians 3, verse 4, this is what it says. King Mesha of Moab was a sheep breeder. He used to pay the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. He was a very good sheep breeder. Yes. And later on, you guys are going to get that joke. But when Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. So King Joram marched out from Samaria at that time and mobilized all Israel. Then he sent a message to King Jehoshaphat of Judah, the king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you go with me to fight against Moab? And what's interesting about that is that not only do you have in the 2 Kings Chronicle here, in the record, you also have King Mesha's name, you have where he's from, you have the kingdom and within which he's fighting, you have the king, Ahab, who has passed away and now Joram has taken his place, and then you have these battles that are breaking out between the Moabites and the Israelites. All these things that we have in artifact, preserved in history, to show that yes, this event actually took place. And historians and scholars believe that 2 Kings was written in around 850 BC. So this event, this fight that broke out, that was recorded on a stone found right outside of Jerusalem, being sold in parts, has a direct connection to the scriptures. And what's remarkable about that is the fact that this is kind of a random thing. This isn't like they found a chariot wheel from one of the Egyptian army men that were trying to stop the Israelites from crossing the Red Sea. This wasn't like they found a king or a crown of King David somewhere in a cave. No, this is just a fight that broke out between the northern kingdom guys, and they needed to bring in King Jehoshaphat from Judah to come up and kind of squash it. And this is random, and yet it's accurate. This is well within the time frame. This is well within the people group. This is well within the fight. All the names, all the locations, all the events happening to a T. Now, this is random. Imagine all the things that they are uncovering in the Middle East to point back to what happened back then that has even more significance. Not only that, what's also interesting is that you have the Moabite version and then you have the Israelite version. The Moabite version was like, yeah, we did great. The Israelite version is like, yeah, we took a couple of losses, but we ended up dominating them for the remainder time, and we actually took land back from them even more than they had before. It's like in a football game, right? Where one team wins like the second quarter, where they scored like 7 points, and the other team scored 0. But in the first quarter, the other team scored 14. In the third, they scored 14. In the fourth, they scored 14. And they ended up getting beaten by like 7 touchdowns. That's how the Moabites were writing the story. And the Israelites, of course, were writing the story, right? But what does this speak to, more importantly? That when it comes to the record that we have within the scriptures, it can be believed because it's historically accurate. It also speaks to the Middle Eastern part of our world has things that are just being uncovered all the time, giving us more and more evidence that what we see and hear, you will eventually find. And what's wild is that nobody was looking for the Moabite stone. They just happened to find it. You guys want to see something even cooler than that? In 1947, there were some shepherds that were tending their flocks on the western side of the Dead Sea, and they stumbled upon a cave known as the Qumran Caves. And within it, there were over 190 little scrolls found. And within the scrolls, there was so much of the Old Testament that the archaeologists said this was the finding of archaeological standard of the 20th century. There was nothing like this that they had found in so long. That the dates for these scrolls that they found were between 250 and 150 BC. And within the scrolls, every Old Testament book had at least some sort of fragment of them in it. And what's wild about that is that a lot of skeptics and critics believe that the Bible was actually kind of like a one-part story that somebody wrote at some point, including the Old Testament and the New Testament together. The problem with that is that this was dated way before the life and the times and the work of Jesus. And what it also had was an entire scroll of the book of Isaiah. You guys are familiar with Isaiah? What this also speaks to is that in 1000 AD, they have this Hebrew Bible that they're pretty confident has some good words and good historical value to it. Well, when they compared the 1000 AD Bible with the 250 BC scrolls, they were translated perfectly. The Hebrew from 250 BC and the Hebrew from 1000 AD and the Hebrew from 2025 AD is all consistent. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means the Bible transmission is not the telephone game that we used to play when we were little kids, where somebody says, Eddie's wearing the, what are we going with here? What kind of color is this, guys? I hear a lot of mumbling. It's a bluish colored shirt with some navy pants and a pair of Stan Smiths, right? And at the beginning of the line, somebody says that phrase. Eddie's wearing a bluish shirt, navy pants, white shoes. But by the end of the line, it says that Jerry wants to go to Taco Bell and get a Chalupa Max. Something got lost in transmission, right? Something got lost in translation. And this is what skeptics, critics have said about the Bible, is that when it comes to the words we have today, how could we be so sure that they're the actual words that were preserved or written back then? Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls are the ticket or the key to us understanding that these guys who put the time in to write these copies, they did such a great job of making sure they did it accurately that here we are, preserved, protected for us to know that these words are more than just words. They really are the words of the living God. But what's also interesting is the words, especially within that Isaiah scroll, that we have to read to this day. Like Isaiah 7:14, for example, where it says this, "Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. See, the virgin will conceive, have a son, and name him Emmanuel." Or Isaiah 9:6, where it says this, "For a child will be born for us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace." It's getting a little Christmassy up in here, isn't it? I mean, it is November 2nd. But then there's also this one little part of Isaiah that was also preserved in those Qumran caves that also speaks to something that is unbelievable. And it's from Isaiah 53, beginning in verse 1, where it says this: "Who has believed what we have heard, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He didn't have an impressive form or majesty that we should look at him, no appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of suffering who knew what sickness was. He was like someone people turned away from. He was despised, and we didn't value him. Yet he himself bore our sicknesses and carried our pains, but we in turn regarded him stricken, struck down, and afflicted. But he was pierced. He was pierced because of our rebellion, crushed because of our iniquities. Punishment for our peace was on him, and we are healed by his wounds. We all went away like sheep. We've all turned to our own way, and the Lord has punished him for the iniquity of us all." That was found in the Qumran caves in 1947 from a scroll that was written between 250 and 150 BC, from a book that was written in 740 BC by a prophet named Isaiah, who was doing everything he could to get the ruling class of Israel to understand that the God that they have is the God that they need, and they do not need to live their lives as if he doesn't have any impact whatsoever. And then he calls out this prophecy. I mean, Isaiah 7:14 and Isaiah 9:6, those are great. Don't get me wrong. We're going to get there in a little bit. But that right there, Isaiah 53, 1 through 6, if that doesn't stir in your hearts and minds, Jesus, you're not looking very hard. You're not digging into what this text is actually saying. And what's remarkable is that that text speaks to something that wasn't even invented yet. Because I try to do a pretty good job of putting "he was pierced" in bold. That's not something Isaiah would have even understood in that moment whatsoever. And the reason why is because crucifixion, which is what that was speaking to, wasn't even invented for another 350 years by a group of people known as the Phoenicians. And the Romans didn't even take advantage of it for another 150 years, perfecting it, using it as their proper or primary mode of execution. So how would Isaiah know what was coming up next? Or how could he write in the record what was happening? Well, it was revealed to him. God told him what was going to go down. God was explaining him, hey, this is how and who will be coming up into the future. And we have in the Gospels a very similar story on a particular weekend around 30 AD where this Jesus did suffer in our place. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment for our sins was upon him. And we have a record of this record outside of the Bible. But when it comes to crucifixion, up until about 1968, they only believed it to be a thing based upon what was written. They didn't really have any physical evidence to suggest that crucifixion was actually a thing. I know for us that sounds kind of silly because we're like, yeah, Jesus was crucified. Arms out, feet together, he died. But up to that point, it was only in literary form that people even understood it. Until, in 1968, the housing ministry in Israel were working in the northern part of Jerusalem, and they dug up some tombs. And in the tombs, they found these bone boxes known as ossuaries, and one of them was given to a guy or about a guy named Johanan. And this is what they found within the bone box. This is a heel bone, the thing going up and down. The thing going this way is a spike or a nail. Johanan was crucified. His family took his body off the cross, put it into a tomb, and then over time, through deterioration, they were able to put those bones into a bone box, and his name was written on the outside. What this speaks to is the actual physical evidence of the type of execution that went down in the first century, because they dated this bone and this nail to the first century AD. What this also speaks to is that Jesus, when he was killed for our sins, was actually killed in the way in which the Gospels and the New Testament writers said it was. As a matter of fact, in Acts chapter 2, verse 36, we get Peter quoted by Luke when he says this. He says, "Therefore, let all the house of Israel know with certainty that God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Messiah. They weren't making this up. They weren't trying to just kind of get people to get something. It wasn't all about having this internal understanding about what's going on and believers being believers. No, they were recording what happened actually on a particular Friday. In this recovery, this bone box, nobody was looking for it. And yet they found it anyway. And the more you dig, especially in that part of the world, the more you find that the words on these pages within the Bible are credible. They're incredible, but they're credible. And they're worth believing in. And this last little piece of evidence that I want to look at this morning is really cool. That there's a document that was found in Egypt in 1920 known as P52 or Papyrus 52. And it's a part of what's called the Rylands Library. And it was discovered in 1920, but it wasn't translated for 14 years because apparently they had better things to do. But in 1934, they realized and recognized that this is actually pretty great. This is John chapter 18, verses 31 through 33, and parts of 37 through 38 on the backside. And what's remarkable about this is that they found it in Egypt in a stack of other handwritten documents. What's amazing is the fact that it's dated back to between 125 and 175 AD. What's bananas about that is the fact that the Gospel of John was written around 90 AD. So within 35 years of the actual autograph of the Gospel of John that John wrote in Ephesus, it had been copied and had made its way from Ephesus, which is in Europe, like kind of Turkey-ish, like the western part of Asia, all the way down to Egypt within 30 years to 50 years, which speaks to the way in which these copies were dished out and were spread around. The gospel, the good news of Jesus, was going all around the Mediterranean rim because the people that were the followers of Jesus and the pastors and leaders of the church at the time was doing everything they could to get this story of Jesus out into a world that was desperate to know God. You guys want to know what it says? Well, in John chapter 18, beginning of verse 31, this is what we get. We get Pilate told them, you take him and judge him according to your law. It's not legal for us to put anyone to death, the Jews declared. They said this so that Jesus' words might be fulfilled, indicating what kind of death he was going to die. And Pilate went back into his headquarters, summoned Jesus, and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? And this is where it jumps to verse 37. You are a king then, Pilate asked. You say that I'm a king, Jesus replied. I was born for this. I've come into the world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate says, what is truth? After he'd said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, I find no grounds for charging him. What's remarkable about this is, first of all, we have something from a document standpoint that lasted for the last 2,000 years. What's also wild is that the other handwritten copies of the New Testament in Greek, they add up to about 5,000 of them. There's another 10,000 Latin copies of the New Testament, handwritten. And there are 9,300 other handwritten copies in other ancient languages of the New Testament. That there's 25,000 handwritten copies of this Jewish carpenter's son who was an itinerant preacher who spent 3.5 years in ministry before he was killed on a Friday. Why would they write so much? Why would they preserve it for so long? There has to be more to the story. What's amazing, too, is just what was communicated within these words. These weren't other words that were preserved in P52. These were the words that Jesus had a conversation with the governor of Jerusalem, who was basically telling him, hey, listen, like when it comes to life, I'm the one that's going to be able to give it or take it away. And Jesus, throughout that conversation, is like, no. I'm the source of truth. I'm the one that's here. I've come into the world to help everybody know and connect with what is true and reject what is not. It means something. It's everything. So what do we do with what we've talked about so far this morning? How do we handle all of these details? Well, what I'm learning, I think, is that around the findings, there is so much meaning that we need to be holding on to. Now, when it comes to, for example, 2 Kings chapter 3, 4 through 7, God was trying to teach the Israelites that when it comes to having a relationship with him and leaning into him It's primary. That they are not to have idols. They're not to reject God. They're not to remove his presence from their life, but they are to actually draw near to him because he wants to draw near to them. And he will never forsake them, and he will never leave them, and he will help lead them through battles, winning wars, and being the God that he wants and they need him ultimately to be. But not only that, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, you see this written record that was preserved within history so that we know that these words really are legitimate. That they were written at a certain time by a certain person to give people good information about the God who wants to rescue them and save them, who has given a plan of salvation. The gospel, y'all, was written and preserved before it even took place in history, some 700 years into the future. And then, of course, with this heel bone and spike going through it, you see just that Peter was right. They really did crucify the Lord and the Messiah. And that death really was more than just a simple death on a Friday. It really did bring back humanity with God. The salvation for all of us was upon him. And then, of course, with P52, you get next day news. Next day news when it comes to what happened in the Gospels. That the work of antiquity, the timing of all of it, the fact that it's so close to the actual events speaks to how legitimate all of this actually is. And if the Bible has archaeological backing like this, there's only 4 pieces of evidence that I showed you guys today. There's so much more that you'll find within other places. Just Google it. But where do we go from here? My hope is that all this that we've talked about in the Bible itself will begin to settle into your heart. That's what we need. We need these words in here. And as I mentioned before, nobody was looking for these pieces of evidence that point back to the biblical accuracy and the archaeological backing that we have. And yet they found them anyway. Jesus, throughout his ministry, he said something similar to this: seek and you shall find. What he was speaking to was a proximity to God. He wanted you to know that God was there and God was near, and that he, as he was walking around, was that actual God. And imagine if you decided that, hey, I'm going to spend time within these words, seeking God out, trying to find out more about who he is and how he operates and what life is all about and how I can stay connected to him and how I can lead my life in such a way, lead my family in such a way, how I can understand what's going on in the whole world sphere of things. And all I have to do is seek it out, dig a little bit, and find it in here. Imagine the difference your life could be. Because when it comes to the extra biblical foundation, it's there. The internal consistency is there. This really is a good book because it's God's book. And he's given it to us to read and to understand and to move in the direction in which he's going. So that's my encouragement to you guys this morning. When it comes to the scriptures, believe them, read them, know them, share them, and show them. Because this is the direction in which God wants you to go. And this is the direction that I want us all to go. Because this is what we've been left with. It has all the information we're ever going to need about our Heavenly Father, about what Jesus did, and about where the Spirit wants to lead us. And I just want to go in that direction.